Running Sentences presents Polyarts, Episode 8. Sideways Deals. The studio deal that Hook has managed to set up finds itself under public scrutiny after being revealed far too early. This is a work of fiction. Names, characters, businesses, and events and incidences that are products in this story are of the author's imagination. Any resemblance to any actual person, living or dead, and or actual events that have happened is purely coincidental. Copyright 2020 Running Sentences Podcast. Hook sat down at his art council office desk in the morning paper, staring back at him from the top of the desk. Emblazoned across the front page sat the headline, "Studio Deal, a bad deal for the state?" Staring at him. He looked up at Alice, who was sitting across from him, looking rather pensive. "What happened?" "Someone outside of the council found out about the deal and decided someone needed to know. Here we are, with the public being the person that they decided needed to know. Do we know who has caused this fluster of I have suspicions that the artist Georgiana is probably the one leaking the news to the press, but I don't know who told her what, and we shouldn't rush to talk about her as it probably is what she wants." What are we to do then?" "I've scheduled a press conference for later this afternoon. We'll talk to the press about the deal and how nothing is finalized, and that talks are still ongoing, so we can't really comment on it. They won't be satisfied. They want firm answers." "Yes, they will. We have until the afternoon to find ones that will at least please the press into not asking probing questions. And anything I come up with I should run past you first, right?" "It would be much appreciated, if only so that when we both speak to the media that we don't crisscross our words and say the wrong thing." She rose from her seat and headed towards the door. She was then shortly gone, with Hook still staring at the front page of the newspaper with a scowl on his face. Once outside of Hook's office, Alice stopped by Susanna's desk and glanced over at her. She was busy working the phone. Alice tried to draw her attention, but the phone was glued to her ear. "Yes, I understand we want answers. We will be doing that at the public press conference this afternoon. I'm sorry, thank you for calling." The second she hung up the phone, it would ring again and go right back to her ear. Alice frowned, still wanting to get Susanna's attention, but left it alone and headed for her own office. She arrived back at her office and found that her purse was ringing, and she sat down at her desk and dug out her cell phone. It took a few seconds to find it and see that the name Georgiana was on the call screen. She wavered for a second on if she should pick it up or not, and then received the call but didn't bother to put the phone to her ear. "Hello." "Oh, don't sound so sad to hear me. It breaks my heart." "What do you want, Georgiana?" "Funding." "You should have led with that the other night. Now everything is all over the news, and I'm dealing with bigger stuff." "What?" "I'm not repeating myself, and don't tell me that the next words out of your mouth are going to be, 'But it wasn't me who told the press all about the deal.' I can't deal with you trying that out right now." The phone line, instead, fell dead as a busy signal came on. Alice looked over at the screen to see that the call had ended. What the hell was that with her? She put the phone down onto her desk, and then turned to her computer so that she could get started on typing up her little spiel for the press. A bit of the morning passed before Alice emerged from her office, and she walked the short walk over to Susanna's desk with a paper that had her comments to the press on it. She stopped at Susanna's desk when she caused the secretary to glance up from her work. She looked harried and frustrated by what had been a long morning so far. "He's in his office if you need him. He hasn't done much other than mutter about art and art's sake. I was going to run my comments to the press pass, and does he have his comments ready?" Susanna then turned to her desk and looked through a pile of papers, coming up with it a second later. Alice took it and gave it a cursory glance, then puts it down on the desk and grabbed a pen out of the nearby pen holder. A few scribbles and cross-outs later, she capped the pen and put it back into its spot. "If you could make these small changes, I think it would come across much better." Susanna had taken the paper and was beginning to look over the changes. "Are you sure the commissioner was specific on what he wanted to say?" Just bring it in when you've got it done. I'll notify him that I've made changes to his talking points." Susanna shrugged and turned to start typing up the letter, while Alice went over to Hook's office door and carefully opened it and peered inside. Hook was meandering about his office, a dark mood seemingly permeating about the room as she eased herself in. "Are you ready for the press, sir?" "Susanna has my comments and is writing them up." "Yes, I saw those, and I made some changes. And before you jump on the fact that I made changes, I did so because we need to make sure that our messages are in sync. Here, you can read what I'm going to say." Alice came further into the room and held out her paper, which Hook then snatched away. He began to look it over. "Dear ladies and gentlemen, it has come to our attention that the press has gotten hold of news that we're working on a deal. We cannot comment on such potential things happening due to their delicate nature and that they might fall apart. Rest assured that when things are ready to be published, the public will get a look to see what's going on." He looked over at her and then back at the sheet. "This says nothing. We could release this as an early press release, and it would have the same effect." "We can, of course, do that if you want. It shortens our time of having to stand in front of the press and saying what we have nothing to say. If I'm up there, then you're going to be up there as well." Susanna stepped through the door to the office and was carrying the revised comments that Alice had recommended. She came over and handed the paper to Hook, who took it and looked it over, and then looked over at Alice once again. "I know it now looks much like what I said with a few twists on words. We, however, cannot say much on the matter, or all the work could go out the window, and that leaves us at Balder's doorstep once again. There is no way we can throw out this name that you mentioned earlier. What was her name? Doing so could get us sued since we have no proof of anything. I doubt you want to be known as the commissioner who got the state sued." "No, you're right about that. All right, you two go away. I need to practice my serious comment face and learn what I'm going to say, so shoo." They both beat a hasty retreat to the door, and Hook resumed his meandering about the office, but now mouthing the words to the paper that Susanna had given to him. When they got out of Hook's office, Susanna went back to her desk, while Alice, instead of heading to her office, headed down a hallway to get down to the lobby. She wanted to make sure that everything was being set up properly, and spent the rest of the morning and into the early afternoon looking over things. It was there, among the chairs that had been set up off to the corner on the right side of the lobby, that she could be found. The setup for the press conference was completed with a few early press people milling about near a refreshments table. Alice stayed off to the side so that she could talk to herself and make sure that everything was okay. Ah yes, the vultures show up for the food because it's free and not because they care about what we actually have to say. She continued her mental checklist of things to make sure things were right as more and more press people came in, most of them heading straight for the refreshments table. A few, however, did try an approach, and Alice held up her hand to stop them. "I understand you want to comment, but you'll get to hear what we have to say soon enough. If you'll take some seats, we will be with you shortly." With that, she slipped off towards the elevator to go fetch Hook and Susanna. She soon arrived back at the Art Council level, with the doors opening upon her arrival, and as she stepped out, she was greeted by the sight of the still pacing Hook, mumbling his notes and reading from a paper as Susanna followed him down the hallway, looking rather lost. "Susanna, what's wrong?" Nothing. I've been lost trying to get the commissioner to stop mumbling and stumbling about and onto the elevator." "Well, it is time. Hook, we need to get this over with. Are you ready?" Hook, who'd perked up and glared at them, headed straight into the elevator without saying a word. Alice and Susanna both looked at one another and shrugged as they both headed into the elevator as well. They rode it back down, and a sort of semi-nervousness had taken hold. None of them could really stand still as they rode the elevator, but they also couldn't move about without warning the others of their nervousness. It also had the effect of making the ride down seem just that few seconds longer, despite being a relatively short ride. Then, when the doors did open and let them out, they each let out a relieved sigh and spilled out of the confined space. They made their way from the elevators towards the set-up area for the press conference in the lobby. A few more press people had shown up and taken the seats. The group, however, was not large. "All right, we just have to go and get this over with. You first." "That's what I was planning on, Commissioner." Alice started off and headed for the little podium set up just in front of all of the chairs. Kept her head on a swivel, trying to glance around and see the somewhat familiar faces as she takes her spot behind said podium. Thank you for coming to our little press conference today. My name is Alice Jacob. I'm the Art Council's permanent secretary on the civil service side of things. Please understand we don't have much to say on the matter, but we do wish to clear up some stuff. The potential deal to get a movie studio to move into the state at an unspecific piece of land is an ongoing situation. We do not have a comment on such matters, as that might put them in jeopardy. Don't ask me what kind of jeopardy, because it's all lawyer speak to me and I don't understand most of what lawyers say. Now, I will bring up Morgan Hook, our Art Council Commissioner, to say a few words. As she stepped away from the podium, she gave a little bow and headed off towards where Susanna and Hook had been standing, just off to the side. She tried to signal for him to come up, but he'd mostly stayed where he was. Then, taking a few steps as she approached, "You changed what your comments were." "I changed it to keep it brief and give you something to talk about." Hook continued on with the podium, his papers neatly in his hand as he approached it. He looked about the audience as he put them down onto the podium. "Well, greetings to all the lovely faces here today. I'm Morgan Hook, the Art Commissioner, and we don't have much to say because there is much open-ended stuff going on in the Art Council office, and of course we can't comment on stuff. Rest assured, we're working to get the best for the arts in the state and everything that the state needs. We aren't just throwing money around willy-nilly at whatever art catches our momentary fancy of any artist or us. Trust me, I've made sure that this is one of my grand political beliefs that I will stand by. We're not just going to throw things around. Still, we can't talk about this project, but we wanted to tell you that we can't tell you anything because if we remain silent, you'd accuse us of hiding things. So, you only have yourselves to blame for coming out here. So, bye!" He stepped quickly off the podium with a wave of his hand and headed towards the elevators. Alice, however, rushed up to the podium to throw in a few last words. "No questions today, thank you. However, if you do have them, hold on to them for a little while. Our public relations department will be in touch shortly, and you can ask whatever you'd like of them, and we will get back to you." She, too, then rushed off towards the elevators, the press having barely paid any attention to what was happening, as they went back to their refreshments and then soon departed the lobby as well. The trio had made their way back to the office, not waiting to see what the reporters would do, and made it all the way back to Susanna's desk before they came to a stop, where they found Lawrence leaning against Susanna's desk, a file in hand as they came up. The trio were happy, and they felt like they'd achieved something and approached with satisfied smiles. Lawrence came off of the desk and offered the folder towards Alice. Hook glanced at the folder and then at the man holding it. "Lawrence, this file is on what's happening in the ground around the old state mental hospital. It should be fine from what I've read, but I'll leave that up to you." It was Susanna who took the file and began leafing through it as Hook merely nodded. "I'll go make copies of this so that we can get it sent off to Dawn and get you a copy and get Alice a copy." Susanna then turned to head off towards the copier. "Yes, please go do that." Alice seemed to have lost her luster and offered a weak smile in return. "Good. Well, with that job done, I have a new one for you, Lawrence. I'm sorry to have to keep you moving about the place, but I don't have much choice in the matter. Why do you have him doing all of the odd work? Because we don't have the employees to cover all that we need. The fragments of not having the budget from the last commissioner is spilling over, and we have to deal with it, Commissioner." Hook nodded to this, though he seemed unsure, and headed towards his office. Alice took Lawrence off to the side so that they could continue to talk. "What's the job?" "Come with me, and I shall show you." They had gone a bit down the hallway and then took another hallway that was a bit dusty and not nearly as well taken care of before Alice came to a stop in front of a door and pushed it open. Inside was the long and abandoned, mostly dusty PR department. She stepped in and waved away the dust that was now circulating around her. Lawrence stayed in the doorway, though he stepped closer as she went further inside, then turned around to face him. "The PR department. Am I getting paid extra for this?" "Overtime is the best I can do right now. All you need to do is send out an email, press saying we have no current comment on the potential movie studio deal. Then answer any phone calls, and if they ask about the movie studio, say no comment. Essentially, all you really have to do is say no comment, which should make up the entirety of your job. That sound okay with you? I guess I'll make it work, though, the dust. I'll get Susanna to send over some cleaning crew so that you can settle in. Good luck. And with that, she marched out of the room, kicking up small puffs of dust as she goes. Lawrence stepped aside to let her out and then turned and stared forlornly back at his new, dusty office. Down the hallway, Alice marched, and she arrived back at Susanna's desk at the same time Susanna did, with her freshly copied paper. She was busy looking them over to make sure that she'd gotten them all right when Alice came up to her. Susanna, I need you to get a cleaning crew over to our PR department office. Don't worry about directing them. They should know where it is, even if you don't. And please tell the commissioner that I'll be out for the rest of the day. I'm attending to matters that involve our current issue with the movie studio. With that said, she headed back down the hallway the way she'd come, and Susanna collected her papers to head into Hook's office. Alice soon arrived in the lobby and stepped off the elevator, and found herself rushed off to the side as a cleaning crew with a bunch of gear pushed their way in. With the elevator soon departing upwards, she looked out the elevator for a second and then shook her head at how quickly the cleaning crew, that they were going so quickly. But the building workers all had tended to act differently, and this was just a case of getting the job done for once. She turned her attention back to her task and headed across the lobby, which, as she passed the area that had held the press conference, was now being disassembled, and she threw a quick glance at it as it returned to looking like a lobby. She'd arrived at the front door and stopped and stared through the glass at the reporter who was hanging around the other side. She had a quick decision to make to decide if she wanted to face this new reporter or to find out if the back door had still accidentally sealed shut. She chose not to press her luck and have to come back from the front door if that back door was sealed, and headed outside. As she came outside, reporter Tyler Lewis jumped to attention and slid his way over to her, just a bit too smoothly for her liking. Miss Alice, contact the PR department if you want to comment. I don't want to talk about the movie studio. Alice came to a stop. She was halfway between the sidewalk and the front entrance. She turned to look over at him with a look of doubt crossing her face. Then why are you bothering me? There is a reported shakeup of the civil service coming down the line, a state mandate to change the upper management or something. Do you know anything about it? I'm too low on the totem pole of service to know anything about that. If there is something like that going on, they wouldn't bother to tell me. Interesting. I heard you were up for promotion now. Thanks. The reporter turned and headed back to his spot to wait for the next victim to come by as she decided to flee down the sidewalk. Her plan was to get to her car and then drive all the way to Georgina's apartment building, which she managed to do in a short time and hoped that the artist was going to be home. She found a parking spot not far from the apartment building and walked the remainder of the way to the building itself, where she found the buzzer board. She did a quick search for the array of names, which seemed haphazard, and forced her to look slowly through all of them. It took a minute to find Georgiana's name, and thanked her luck as she pressed the buzzer. A few seconds passed as she waited for a response. Yes, who is it? It's Alice. I would like to talk to you, please. A second later, the entrance door buzzed and popped open unlocked. She grabbed it and headed inside. A few minutes went by before there was a knock on the door, and Georgiana went over to open it, not bothering to look through her people. Instead, she just popped it open and stood in the doorway to find Alice on the other side. The two continued this standoff, judging one another with harsh glares. Do I get invited in, or do I have to stand here? First, what brings you here, Alice? Then, if you give a good, proper response and not some double talk that makes your head spin, then I will consider letting you in. I'm hoping that you will give me the name of the person who told you about the movie studio deal. Why would I do that, Alice? I'm trying to protect you, Georgiana, from the press. I don't want you to be blamed for the matter if it should somehow be anonymously leaked. I don't trust our commissioner, I'm sorry. I didn't have anything to do with it, though. Then we should clear it up. A name or a point in the right direction would help me convince that you aren't responsible and I need to go somewhere else to find out what happened. Instead of letting Alice in, Georgiana lets step outside of her apartment and almost closes the door behind her. But she leaves it open just a crack, and Alice found herself taking a step back to give her room. I heard about a deal through a friend of mine. They heard about it through the State Planning Commission on land or something like that. Is that good enough for you? Yes, it's a direction to go on. And one last thing. What was your plan? How did working your way into a movie studio deal help you? I was trying, or going to, secure funding for other artists. I don't see why actors and such should get all of the Art Council's funds. Georgiana, even if the deal happens, actors and such wouldn't get all of the funds. The council is explicitly set up to fund many arts, not just that one. Yeah, but you're part of the state, so you would say that. Alice was about to protest this when Georgiana pushed her door open again and stepped back into her apartment. Then came the middle finger from Georgiana, just for good measure, as she shut the door. With a shrug, Alice turned and headed back down the way she'd come. Getting all the way back to her car, Alice found her phone giving a sharp, shrill ring in her person, and there was only one person assigned to that tone of ring, and that was Commissioner Hook. She plucked it out of her purse and put her phone to her ear. Well, what's going on? If you're asking how the search into the leak is going, it is not going well. Crap. Well, the press has gotten off our backs for now, the moment, from what I've heard. So we have a second or two before things flare up. Find out what you can and then get back to me. The phone line fell dead, and Alice shook her head and put her phone back into her purse and continues to her car. Soon she was headed off for the building that contained the State Planning Commission on land. Back at the Art Council PR office, Lawrence sat in what was now a clean and clear office space. The cleaning crew had done such a spectacular job of removing any semblance of dust from the space that it was just amazing. But it now seemed too clean, leaving him feeling like touching anything but his computer would somehow leave the whole place dirty again. A soft knock on his door drew his attention as Susanna came in. Hey, Commissioner Hook would like to see if you have a moment. Lawrence carefully got up from his chair and was thankful for the moment to be able to get away from the sparkling clean office. Alright, did he say what he was all about? No, didn't tell me a thing. With a sigh, Lawrence signaled for Susanna to lead the way. Down the hallway, Hook was in his office, looking rather concerned and waiting for the knock from Lawrence. A few seconds later it came, and he wandered over to the door and pulled it open before Lawrence could, allowing the young man to dutifully shuffle his way in. Susanna was right behind him, but Hook stopped her. Susanna, you don't need to come in right now, I think. This is just between me and Lawrence. I don't want you involved. She nodded and backed out, closing the door on her way out. Hook signaled that Lawrence should take a seat. Do you know why I called you in? No, sir, I don't. Why? I've done something I'm not proud of and will piss off Alice. I need to figure out how bad things will be. Since you work for her, you should know how she operates. I'm not her minder, and I don't know how she will react or act. Yes, but Lawrence, you have an idea since you work with her pretty closely. You should as well, sir. Well, yes, but I avoid her since it makes things a bit easier. To this, Lawrence could only shake his head at the roundabout conversation that was going nowhere quickly. He decided he'd had enough. What is the issue you are having? I may have accidentally been the cause of the movie studio news leak. I was talking to the Land Commission and other people were around and it might have been a bit too loud, and I stressed that it was purely accidental. Yeah, I think you're safe to assuming that she'll be angry at you for that. Though if it is accidental, we can probably mitigate the blowout. How? Well, Commissioner, I don't... I'll think of something and I'll deal with it, but I need something in return. Okay, sounds good. I can do that. What do you need? Lawrence got up and stretched a bit. "Oh, you'll find out when the timing's right." He then headed for the door to leave. Hook, who had also risen and followed Lawrence to the door as Lawrence left. He closed the door fully and waited a few minutes before opening it again and stepped outside. He was carefully looking around for Lawrence, who had already headed off towards the PR office. Susanna, who was at her computer doing some typing, and it all seemed well. He turned to her. "Susanna, are you free now?" Yes. What is it, boss?" "You like drama and office intrigue, I heard." "Well, I've got a chance for you to get involved in it. I need you to keep an eye on Lawrence and all that he says and does during the working hours. It would be a bit weird if you were doing this in the off hours, but I don't think the department is willing to spring for overtime for such things." Good. Get on that for me, would you?" Hook went back into his office as Susanna spun her chair to try and see what her boss actually wanted, but the door had been closed. She found herself torn between continuing her typing or going after Lawrence and sulking around. She took a second to decide and then carefully stood up and began to sneak down the hallway, trying not to look obvious that she was up to something, but looking all too obvious with her movements. Elsewhere in the capital city, Alice had exited a squat, square brick building that held the Land and Planning Commission. She'd spent a fair amount of time of her afternoon into the evening there, just so she could get details and all things concerning the studio deal when her cell phone once again rang. Her hand dipped into her purse searching for it, and she was trying not to scowl after having just learned a few things, and she managed to pull her phone out and put it to her ear. "Lawrence, it's unusual for you to call me. What's going on?" "I found a person who may have accidentally talked about the movie studio situation." "What a coincidence. I was just talking to people who learned about it, and they gave me a pretty good idea as well." "Ah, I'm guessing you aren't pleased about what you've potentially learned." "I'm going to sleep on it, and then act. I take it then that Hook suspects and knows that I know it was him?" "Yeah, he has his suspicion about such things." "This is giving me a headache. Well, I guess it's good for him to have worry, but it's just too much right now. I'll see you tomorrow." She promptly hung up her phone and stuffed it back into her purse and takes a moment to settle down and close her eyes to rub her temples and make sure that the oncoming headache was a little less likely before heading off towards her car to head home for the night. When Alice arrived at the Art Council office the next morning, she was walking down the hallway towards her office when she came to a stop at the sight of a meeting room door wide open and in the way. On the door was a sign with the words, "Meeting of Department Heads" written on it. She stared at the sign for a second. What is going on here? A trap of some sort? An admission of guilt by Hook? Or just a long conversation which achieves little? She sighed to herself and walked up to the meeting room door and looked inside. In there sat Lawrence and Susanna, both with their arms crossed looking out at the door. She shook her head as she entered the meeting room and then headed over to a seat to sit across from Susanna and Lawrence, and doing her best to get comfortable at what was going to be awkward. "I take it you want to talk to me about something?" "Well, Alice, we're here to make sure that you don't go off on the commissioner. We want to keep the office in working order after all. Even if there was a terrible slip-up by the head of the office, we know, me and Susanna here know that it wasn't intentional, at least we hope it isn't." "Is that all?" "Susanna?" "Yes, why?" "I fear that you two have been taken in by Hook and his ability to get you on his side of the matter. The truth of the matter is that there is nothing I could do to him other than remind him of his duties. You two have been doing his dirty work acting as a screen for him. Good job." She then pushed her chair back and rose, shaking her head as she headed out of the meeting room. This left Lawrence and Susanna both surprised and unable to react as she left. Out in the hallway, as Alice exited the meeting room, she nearly ran into Hook, who was coming in for the morning. Alice, you're only here for the morning because of state work and your lackeys are in the meeting room." She turned, rather coldly, and walked off down towards her office. Hook was left kind of rather speechless and stunned, and stared after her, and then turned towards the meeting room and seeing Lawrence and Susanna sitting there. What's going on? Lawrence and Susanna are rising from their seats and he meanders his way, and we were trying to make sure that Alice wasn't going to blow up at you. Oh, great! How did it go? Well? She seems to go along with the idea that yelling at you was a bad idea. But she will probably take a long time to trust you again, Commissioner, with anything ever important. Well, that's better than her trying to exile me and succeeding because she happens to know everybody who's anybody. Anything else? I believe, Commissioner, you have a meeting with the head of the building before you leave for the day. There was something about changes coming that he wanted to talk about. Okay, good. I'll be in my office should anything else come up. Hook then meandered his way out of the meeting room, to which both Susanna and Lawrence followed him out, heading off in different directions. Down the hallway, Alice had gotten into her office and was about to sit down heavily at her desk, her purse in hand ready to toss it across the room, but smacked it into the desk instead, a frustrated shake moving about her body as she tries for a few seconds to calm down. Fuckers. The release from the swear gave her a moment of relaxation. She also thought about it, just letting out a giant sigh, but with all of that out of the way, she set about getting to her work. She got her computer running to check her emails, and all the while grabbing a stack of papers out of her literal inbox to see if there was anything interesting. But a quick flick through that proved that they were all just requests for funding. She turned to her computer and opened her email application, entering keywords to quickly scan through the bounds of hundreds of emails that clogged their way into the system. She stopped and opened one marked important, and then promptly closed it when she saw it was not in fact important. Another few emails went by this before she actually came to something important. Dear Alice, this is the lawyer for Dawn Keith. We regret to inform you that she has decided to pull out of this studio deal. The other parties may decide to continue, but we, however, will not. Alice froze for a second and then shot up out of her chair and out of her office in just a second. As she came down the hallway into Susanna's area, the young secretary was nowhere to be seen, and she turned and entered Hook's office. There she found Hook behind his desk, looking over at Susanna, who sat across from him with a rather shocked expression on her face. Lawrence was also there, but he was standing, and he looked rather disappointed but pleased that he'd managed to say what he wanted to say. Alice, who'd just come in, stopped and stared. As you wish. I apologize for taking advantage of you, Lawrence, and thinking that you were not on my side, but I cannot accept that you want your previous post back, as it has been filled most ably by Susanna here. And yet, Commissioner, you made a promise to me. Alice slipped quietly over, but it wasn't quiet enough, and her movement drew the attention of the trio. Oh, Alice, thank you for the distraction. What's going on? The studio deal, sir, is falling apart. Dawn Keith has pulled out. We need to reorganize our efforts before the whole thing collapses. Well, I can't interfere, nor can any of us, as Susanna will tell you. The Dr. Vincent Claude, who's the head of the whole thing, he told us to sit by and not do anything, or else he would just straight up say no and go away. It's true, what the commissioner says. We were not to poke into the matter or try and convince the doctor to do anything. You cannot just idly sit by, you two. We have courses of action to make it appear that we're not taking courses of action. We're going to take that. This deal is going to fall apart if we don't do anything. I'm going to spend the rest of the day trying to enact backup plans, just in case. Okay, Commissioner? Just make sure it isn't, it's okay, but make sure that they don't find out. Alice was angry and annoyed. Was already storming her way out of the office with Lawrence hot on her trail. This left Susanna and Hook in the office, and Susanna had also gotten up from her chair and was looking to be hanging around, but Hook waved her away. Still steaming mad, Alice had made her way back to the office, but had paid no mind to the fact that Lawrence was trailing her. He entered awkwardly and stood there trying to figure out what he should do, as She sat down. Listen, I just wanted to say that I have little against you, but I work better under Hook as his secretary. Is that all? Yes. Good, I don't care. Do what's best for you until you have a new job or quit. I need someone to work the PR office. If you could please return there for the day. Yes, I guess I can do that. Lawrence backed his way out of his office, trying not to anger her any further as she got back to work. And so the four of them spent the morning exactly where they were, separated in their respective spaces, until the early afternoon, when the door to Hook's office was thrown open by Duncan Blast. He stepped into the room looking rather swarthy and trying to puff out his chest in a manly manner. Hook jumped up in surprise at the suddenness of the man's appearance and tried to not let it show, even as the man slammed the door shut. Afternoon. Hi? Bet you're wondering why I wanted to meet with you. Oh, you're the building commissioner of this building. Yes, didn't you know? Yes, but maybe no. Oh, well, I wanted to know if you'd be interested in letting your permanent secretary, Alice Jacob, move on from her position here. What? I need a new head of my department, and I think she'd be a valuable asset to have. Oh, well, if that's all, then yes, please take her far, far away from me. Duncan found this very pleasing and bounded up to Hook, offering his hand, to which Hook took only to feel like the man was trying to shake his arm off. A second later, the handshake was done, and Duncan, with as much exuberance as he entered, was gone. He then bounded his way down the hallway into Alice's office, where he found her staring at the computer screen, which was the spread of film contracts and might be of good use to Baldur's District, plus some other potential artistic endeavors to get some money into the area. None of them looked like a great option. Duncan briskly stepped in and put his hands on his hips as he came to a stop in front of her desk. Alice Jacob, I have come to take you away. She stopped staring at her computer screen to look over with arched eyebrows at the man. Oh? Yes, I have a need for a new permanent secretary to look over the building on the civil service side of matters. I want you for the job. Do I get a say in the matter? Yes, of course. I, Duncan Blast, would never force you into anything, but you are a person of choice by all parties, including your superiors. Alice sat back in her chair and paused to take it all in for the second that she had, and then looked over Duncan before she couldn't help a small smile coming from her face as she sat forward again. So you're the one behind the rearrangement of the top officials? Well, no, I believe they were considering that before I approached them about a new head of my department, but my comments may have pushed things forward. I don't really know. They don't really talk to me, and I don't really care. I see. Well, if you give me a few days, I should be able to think it over. Would that be okay with you? Yes, of course, take a few days. He then, a little bit less exuberantly, walked back out of Alice's office with her watching him as he went. She then sat back in her chair to try and take in what had just happened, but her office phone then lit up with a ring on ID stating it was from Dr. Vincent. Her hand snaked quickly to pick it up. Hello, Dr. Vincent. Oh, you're Alice Jacobs, correct? The one in charge of the affairs over at the Art Council. Yes, sir. Then hello, pleasure to finally get to talk to you. Unfortunately, I can only bear bad news. The studio deal is off for that property and your estate. I will be looking elsewhere, and don't bother trying to contact me again. Goodbye. The line then fell dead with a busy buzz in her ear until she slowly put the phone back into its spot with a shake of her head. Oh dear, these last few days have not been good. She sat back in her chair again and then absently stared at her computer screen. End of episode 8. Thank you for listening.